On October 25th, 1974, Carl Higdon, a 41-year-old oil worker, went on a weekend hunting trip in Wyoming. While hunting deer, he encountered an alien called Asu-1, who knocked him out and took him to his planet. His wife, Marjorie Higdon, wrote in the book Alien Abduction of the Wyoming Hunter, the first-person story of Carl Higdon, that he was an experienced hunter, but this forest was completely new to him. It was remote and uninhabited with no trace of human presence. He drove to the area but then had to walk through a small wooded area with the terrible condition of the road, standing on the other side of the mountain were a herd of deer, one of which was a large buck. When Carl was ready to shoot the deer, mysteriously his shot was completely silent, and the gun did not recoil at all. He then watched in amazement as the bullet flew forward very slowly a few meters before suddenly falling to the ground as it had hit something invisible. Then Higdon suddenly felt the whole atmosphere around him become tense as if filled with static electricity. He went to pick up the bullet and saw that it was bent, as if it had collided with a strong solid object. At that moment, the deer had already run away, but the hunter was not alone. Turning to his right, he saw a human figure in the shadow of the trees, which he at first assumed was another hunter. It was the size of a tall man, wearing a tight black jumpsuit, like a diving suit, with a pair of seat belts and a metal belt decorated with a yellow star. The creature had a non-human head, no ears, no chin, small and deep eyes, an open mouth with 3 visible giant fangs. 2 short antennae protruded from his forehead, while his hair looked like straw and stood straight up. The creature seemed to have no neck at all, with a monstrous head directly on its shoulders that blended into its body. Its arms were significantly extended. One of them looked like a chisel, where it should have had a hand, while the other arm had no hand. It approached him silently. He should have heard the crackling of twigs and the crunch of snow under his feet, but there was nothing. The mysterious creature looked at Carl for a moment, then slowly moved towards him, asking him, "How are you?" in English. Surprised, he replied, "Okay." After a few seconds, the creature nodded and walked even closer. It didn't seem threatening, even asking Carl if he was hungry. The creature waited for Higdon's answer. Then he took out a plastic bag and used telekinesis to give it to Carl, who took the bag and found 4 pills. The creature claimed the pills could keep Carl full all day. He swallowed one and pocketed the rest. The entity introduced himself, saying its name was Asu-1, before pointing to a transparent, cube-shaped object, his spaceship, which had no entrance, no windows, and no landing. It just sat on the ground. Also asked if Carl wanted a ride. Before he could answer, he was entering the ship, as if he was teleporting. He did not understand how he could fit in such a small space, but to his surprise he found that his hands and feet were tied. As Carl began to calm down, he saw some kind of force field where the 5 deer were frozen. Carl was certain that these were the same deer he had spotted earlier. Asu-1 approached him and put a helmet on his head. The craft then detonated, allowing Carl to see the transparent walls as they took off, and his car lay at the bottom of the hill. The spacecraft extended before reaching Earth's orbit. Higdon and the aliens then flew into deep space about 100,063 light years from Earth, landing on a new planet. The ship came close to a large tower. Several colored lights circled the tower like powerful searchlights, so bright that Carl could not open his eyes. He barely remembers what happened next. He saw a group of people outside, but couldn't understand why they were there or who they were. Asu then informed Carl that his species often traveled to Earth to hunt. He was then taken to a room where he was scanned before Osu told him that he was no match for their purpose and sent back home. The aliens returned to Earth as quickly as they flew away. Osu took the pills back from Carl and went for his rifle, but then said he was not allowed to. Later, the aliens disappeared, while Carl was left in the middle of the forest, completely confused and scared. He wandered until he found what he later realized was his car. He was able to make a distress signal with his radio before getting back into the car, shivering as he waited for help. After the discovery, search parties discovered that Carl's car was located at the bottom of a deeply wooded canyon, 5 miles from where he remembered parking it. There were no roads nearby, and no tire tracks were found in the ravine, providing evidence of Higdon's claims. After the meeting, Higdon was so stressed that he did not initially recognize his wife. They discovered that during the alien abduction, some people saw mysterious lights in the sky. Meanwhile, a horrified Carl was too embarrassed to say anything about the discovery. He kept mentioning that the bullet flattened when it hit something invisible. Regressive hypnosis was used to recover most of his memories. Doctors later performed a medical examination on Carl, discovering that the scars on his lungs from long-term tuberculosis had disappeared along with the kidney stones he had. A flat bullet was found in his jacket pocket, and research showed that it would only take such damage if it hit a very hard surface, harder than wood or rock in the forest. Carl was repeatedly called a fraud who allegedly made everything up to become famous. But at least the strange fact that his car was found in a place where, according to the laws of physics, it could not be, suggests that the story was real. On the night of October 11th, 1973, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker Jr. arrived at the sheriff's department in Pascagoula, Mississippi. They were frantic. They told authorities that they had just been abducted by aliens. Both had stabbed wounds in one hand. The police tried to catch them lying, but failed.
Took them down there and put them in a room with a voice-activated mic and hidden in the desk to see what they'd say. Well, me and the other investigator got up and left to let them talk to see if they were going to say, well, we got them fooled and all. They didn't. They were really concerned. The boys kept telling Charles, don't talk to them and people are going to come back and get us.
Both men later took polygraph exams. In 1973, Charles worked at a shipyard. The two had gone fishing after work at an abandoned boat launch and were still there after the sun went down. Charles told the Washington Post in 1975, I was just getting ready to get some more bait when I heard some kind of zipping around. I looked up and saw a blue flashing light. At first he thought it was police arriving to tell him to leave the property. Calvin turned around too. They saw a 30-foot long object with a little dome on top, hovering and hissing. They described it as being football-shaped as it hovered just above the ground. 3 small creatures emerged, also hovering. The men were suddenly paralyzed. He said the creatures grabbed them with pincher-like claws and dragged them towards the object. While in the ship, they floated. Charles said they were given a physical exam by something that looked like a big eye. A constant mechanical sound buzzed the entire time, and then they were dropped off from where they were picked up. Calvin was standing with his hands in the air screaming. They ran for help.
I heard a noise and turned around and looked and seen some blue lights, some hazy blue lights. And that's when, the craft landed behind us. We still wasn't for sure what it was. But it landed and we turned around and the front of it opened up. And when it did, it was just like we were paralyzed there. He couldn't move and I couldn't move. But there's 3 robot-looking creatures that floated out. They didn't walk. They just kind of glided out of the craft and come over, and 2 got a hold of me and 1 got a hold of Charlie, and they took us inside. They did an examination. So when they examined us, we was probably in there, I'm going to say 45 minutes. I'm not real sure. I didn't have a watch or nothing at the time. they put us back out at the same place we were, facing the water, and I was froze, in one spot. And originally, I didn't want to talk about it no more, so Charlie just said, play like you passed out, and then you won't have to say nothing too much. So that's what I did. I kind of went along with that. When it took off, it didn't make hardly any noise at all. You just heard like a zipping noise. It was zip, and that was it. It was gone. It shattered the windows in my car. I had a brand new 1973 Horner Rambler. I did go on a few talk shows at the beginning of this, thinking that it would settle down after that. There's people, even up till today, that's still trying to track me down.
At first, sheriff's investigators thought the men were intoxicated or lying. After interviewing the men, they left the room with the tape recorder silently recording, hoping to catch them dropping the act as they left. But they didn't. They talked about what they saw and how scared they were. The sheriff's captain said, "We did everything we could to try to break their story. If they lied to me, they should be in Hollywood." It was national news overnight. Press conferences were held and cameras were shoved into their still stunned faces. A UFO researcher from Northwestern University flew down and said their story had been verified. Skeptics called them liars or said Charles had sleep paralysis and hallucination, while Parker was highly suspectable. Apparently, believers flocked to Pascagoula by the thousands, wrapped in aluminum foil, and sat on the hoods of their cars through the night, waiting for visitors from another world. Maybe a couple people did that, but I find it really hard to believe that thousands would do that. Maybe in the 70s? I think an interesting video idea would be to visit these alien encounters towns. I love traveling. I think it would be fun. Charles was 42 at the time and well known in the community, so perhaps he felt he could handle the media attention. He shared the experience with anyone who would listen. He published a book in 1983. Calvin, on the other hand, was 18 or 19 when it happened. He had just arrived in Pascagoula from an even smaller town and was looking to earn some extra money before returning home to get married. He told the media that he passed out at the beginning of the whole incident and has no memory of what happened. That was the only lie he told. He, in fact, did remember what happened and was so afraid that aliens had infected him with something that when he got home from the sheriff's department, he took a bath and bleach. Within a few weeks, he left town, he got married, and picked up work in oil fields. If someone at his job recognized him, he would quit. It was something he understandably did not want to discuss. If Charles was trying to get rich from the story, it didn't work. Calvin said that before Charles passed away in 2011, he occasionally paid the elderly man's utilities. Calvin is now 60, went into hiding in recent years, though published a book in 2018. I felt like everyone deserved an explanation. Everyone has an expiration date, and I wanted to get this out before I pass. I've had some near-death experiences, and I'm in bad health. I just wanted to do it. Two eyewitnesses came forward claiming that in the night on question, they saw an unidentified flying object with blue lights flashing up and down the Pascagoula River. They said they kept it a secret all these years because they were afraid of people's reactions. One of them, Maria Blair, said the story is very true. That's what has bothered me for 45 years. It's been on my mind for 45 years. The river bank where the men say the close encounter took place was given a historical marker, calling it one of the best documented cases of alien abduction. The city holds an annual alien festival every October. After decades of avoiding media spotlight, Calvin was there for the dedication. He passed recently, following a life he avoided to be dictated by the alleged event. He said, "It completely changed my life. It's just a deal in life that happens and you don't have any control over it. Maybe if I was a little older, I would have handled it better, but I wasn't and I didn't. Under the circumstances now, I'm kind of glad it did happen because I got to meet a lot of people I wouldn't have gotten to meet." The Berkshire UFO sightings occurred in 1969 in Massachusetts, as well as the surrounding area. Not a single newspaper or police report published on September 1st, 1969 contained stories about UFO sightings or abductions. Radio stations played calls from citizens sharing their experiences, but no one had the foresight to preserve tapes, meaning the most evidence we have today is eyewitness accounts. Radio host Tom J. contacted the local police to ask if the anomaly was reported to them. Sometimes the police describing the events were groups of people who had not met before that night. Some residents, including Thomas Reed and his younger brother Matthew, encountered UFOs in earlier years. In 1966, 3 years before the Berkshire, Massachusetts UFO sighting, the brothers saw lights and figures in their house being led to the woods and beamed into a UFO. The next year, in 1967, the boys saw lights, heard their door slam, and woke up near their driveway after another trip inside a UFO. In 1968, the boys, their mother, and their grandmother were traveling in a car on Route 7, a highway that runs from Connecticut to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and then Vermont. Reports of sightings that night came from towns directly adjacent to Route 7. The story of the Reed brothers made its way to the Great Barrington Historical Society and Museum in 2015. As the director said, she believed the story was true. By a vote of 6-3, the story was moved to the museum, where it continues to be preserved as historically accurate, a piece of the region's history. Reed's story got a little more push towards the wider recognition when the city of Sheffield placed in a monument with the plaque near the bridge where the family's car crashed that night in 1969. The headline read, "Welcome to the site of the first UFO incident officially inducted into the USA as historically true." It was donated by the History Channel and its Ancient Aliens series. The sculpture did not last long and was removed in June 2019 after 4 years. Controversy stemmed from the monument's impact on the city's reputation, then over its legal placement on city property. Another eyewitness report from that night from Kevin Titus, who was with a friend when they decided to search for 2 cows that had disappeared from their farm. In their search, they found a cow, though it was no longer alive. Kevin described it as being ripped apart. Strangely, the scene was completely bloodless. The 2 boys then had a bright light shone on them and saw a craft shaped like a turtle shell hovering silently. The boys alerted their parents, who also saw the lights on the UFOs over their farm. They immediately called the radio station, the police, and even notified the military of the incident, because what's the local law enforcement going to do about a UFO sighting? No law was broken. They aren't really equipped to handle that. The military confirmed that none of their aircraft was nearby, but their radars detected strange activity in the area that weekend. Although there is no concrete evidence of UFO sightings and abductions that night, over 250 people in the area reported seeing a UFO. Those involved in the incident, and especially those who claimed to have been pulled into the UFO, felt offended that it was being called an abduction. They never used the word abduction to describe these encounters. So with the sheer number of reports, everyone is saying different things. This is different from other notable UFO sightings in the United States. Thomas Reed and his family were crossing a bridge when they saw a disc-shaped object hovering in the air. He described the object as a white sphere. sphere larger than a football field. They tried to escape the UFO by continuing down the road, but it followed them. Their car was engulfed in a light as they were pulled into the UFO. When Reed took the polygraph test, the results showed that it was over 99% accurate. Melanie Kirchdorfer and her family went to a lake as her father backed into the parking lot. A very bright light engulfed their car. Everyone in the car started to panic. Her father decided to follow the light, even though Melanie begged him not to. She and her sister began to tremble in fear. After that, her sister no longer remembered anything. However, she remembers levitating and then being on a craft. Tom Warner remembers seeing Melanie on the right side of the ship. He remembered seeing extreme fear on her face. However, she doesn't remember meeting him. She remembers being in a room with several other children. Suddenly, the other children begin to disappear one by one. Then she woke up alone by the lake. Then she had to walk home. Meanwhile, Tom recalls lying on his back on the other side of his family's property. With all the reports from this night, researching this case is overwhelming to me. If you are interested in it, Strange Mysteries and Yes Theory have an episode on it.